I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. Tonight, we're leading off with a look under the hood of Oregon's economy. Some parts of the engine are running well, others not so much. Oregon's latest revenue forecast. That's our big story tonight. Not many TV news stations would tackle this story in the depth that we're going to, and for good reason. It's complicated and dense, and yeah, it can be boring. But come on, it affects all of us. And I know that you are smart and you care about a healthy state economy, so we are diving in. Oregon runs off a variety of taxes. The personal income tax and the corporate taxes are the two biggest and the most important in terms of economic health. So the state legislature gets a report from the wizards at the Oregon Department of Revenue who keep track of all the numbers and analyze those trends. Our guide tonight is Josh Lerner, the state's acting economist for now. He's leaving his post for another job outside of state government soon, but nonetheless, yesterday he took lawmakers through the latest report. This was the first slide. On the left, it shows that inflation is cooling down here in the West, but it was wildly high in 2022 and part of 23. And that graph on the right shows jobs. The number of openings is in gray and above the hiring rate, which is there in dark blue. But Lerner says that blue line shows it's actually very hard for a lot of folks in Oregon to get a job right now.
Where while a lot of the top line indicators for the economy are still doing quite well, right? Unemployment is still relatively low. The employment rate is still high. Job growth is still positive. Like there's a lot of good things about the labor market today, but the hiring rate has slowed down tremendously. That's kind of the dark blue line here in the chart on the right, where the actual pace of hiring, this is Oregon data, national similar, is the lowest it's been in about a decade, right? Job growth is pretty slow. So if you have a job, it's good today. But if you're looking for a job, it's harder to find one than it has been really in the last handful of years.
The labor market, labor having trouble finding new jobs if they're laid off or fired or leave, is that, can you characterize that as across the board, or is that in higher income jobs, or is that in lower income jobs?
I would say some of the weakness, especially in those more rate sensitive sectors, are what we would call middle wage jobs. Construction and manufacturing in particular has added few jobs or lost jobs in manufacturing's case in recent years. And so that's much harder to find a job today if you're searching for that type of employment. Also in terms of layoffs, though, certainly in the last couple of years, the big layoff announcements we'll talk about in a minute, and some of the trends we've seen are more in the high wage sectors, right? When it comes to high technology, software, saw some layoffs a couple of years ago. Now we're talking about semiconductor related layoffs in Oregon and apparel and footwear layoffs in Oregon and that sort of thing. So that's certainly much more tilted towards, college educated, higher paying positions and the like. And so there's even been the term white collar recession thrown around in some of the media reports and economists in the last couple of years. And so we've certainly seen that in the data.
So in general, Oregon's economic engine is running pretty well. But if you know someone out of work, cut them some slack, will you? It's harder than you might think to find jobs in some of our state's industries now. The state economist also had a bit of gloomy outlook for some of Oregon's biggest industries.
3 notes on the long-term outlook. I think the long-term outlook for semiconductors in Oregon is still bright. We have the upcoming investments, at least until if we heard something else, we would change that assumption. I think that is good news. The challenge today is that semiconductors in Oregon, while there's hundreds of firms technically in the cluster, it is dominated by one large firm, right? And that's the one firm where we're seeing the announcement. So maybe opportunities within other employers within the cluster maybe are a little more less diverse, just given that. Whereas footwear and apparel, right? We have a number of large multinational companies with headquarters or headquarter type operations in Oregon. And so while one of them may be seeing some layoffs, the other ones are growing. And so you're able to keep those workers with the skills, tailored to the specific industry cluster locally. And so the long-term outlook is strong. For wood products, we've been seeing the long-term structural decline in wood products in Oregon for 2 generations or longer at this point, right? And so I think when you see some of these closures, if we see full closures, it takes a lot of capital and investment to start back up again. And so I think you tend to see a ratchet down and then stability and then a ratchet down and stability. And so I wouldn't be super optimistic about long run growth for the industry, just given trend for the last 40 years.
Okay, so he's talking about Intel, the big chip company, which announced recently it will cut 15,000 jobs and save $10 billion next year alone. We still don't know exactly what the impact in Oregon will be, but it's definitely going to be felt here. And unfortunately, the future does not look great for those of you in the lumber industry, which I'm sure does not come as a huge surprise based on how things have been going for some time now. But outside of that, many companies are doing well in Oregon. And while we're talking about corporations, I thought these graphs were interesting. The one on the left shows in the gray there how much corporate taxes have gone up relative to that smaller blue line, which is how much their profits have gone up. It's a big jump since 2015 or even since 2020. And on the right side, the graph compares Oregon's corporate taxes in the blue line to the median of state taxes nationwide. And as you can tell, we're kind of right in the middle of the pack. But getting back to the economic engine, personal income tax, the state economist says lots of people are working now in Oregon. In fact, more tax money is coming in than they predicted, and more taxpayers are filing than predicted. So what's that mean? Well, potentially a bigger kicker refund for you in 2026.
Okay, so I think bottom line for the general fund revenues, this is for the current budget period for 23-25, general fund only, are up considerably, right? Available resources are up $676 million since we last produced a forecast a couple of months ago. 2/3 of that change is tracking, right? Actual collections through the door in the last 3 months, are nearly $500 million above the forecast. And trying to think through what the implications there are, why that is such a large change. Is it that collections have boomed, much stronger than anticipated, or is it that our forecasts were maybe overly pessimistic, or is it the forecast was too low, or is it the revenues are much higher than fundamentally you would expect? And I think it's more the latter than the former. I think the flavor of the outlooks were right. We're expecting a decline in corporate, and we got stability in corporate. We're expecting a 50% decline in personal income taxes on a year-over-year basis because we're paying out the kicker, right? So net of the kicker would be up, but with the kicker, we expected a 50% decline last quarter year-over-year, and we got a 45% decline year-over-year. So I think it's maybe that the forecasts were a little too pessimistic, and it's not so much that the revenues are going gangbusters relative to the broader economy. I think that's part of it.
And the other part, he said, is $300 million more in corporate taxes coming in than expected. Because of the change, Oregon's unique tax refund law is probably going to kick in. Here's how it works. At the end of each 2-year budget cycle, the economists make their best guess on how much tax money is going to come in for the next 2 years. And if that number ends up being the actual number, if it's 2% more than what they guessed, then every taxpayer gets a refund, which is called the kicker. Currently, the state economists expect tax collections will be nearly $1 billion higher than expected, $987 million if you must know, which would mean a tax refund of between $200 and $400 for every taxpayer, depending on your income tax bracket. Those numbers will likely change between now and 2026, but that's where things stand right now. Also, as I mentioned before, Josh is leaving his state post, lured away by the private sector. Thanks for your service to Oregon, Josh. Just 3 days until the possession of hard drugs like fentanyl will once again become illegal in Oregon. Counties across the state have created deflection programs to offer people caught with drugs treatment instead of jail time. Multnomah County still in flux and a bit of chaos. Today we learned that Portland Fire and Rescue will play a role in all of this. Blair Best explains.
It's safe to say there's nothing pretty about addiction. Just take it from Amber.
We live on a $5 to $50 budget depending on how many cans we collect for the day.
Starting Sunday, people caught solely for possession of hard drugs will have the option of treatment over jail, part of Multnomah County's deflection program.
I'd choose it right now. I'd love to go to treatment.
There will soon be a place, a deflection center, for officers to take people like Amber to get connected to medical and recovery services. It was supposed to open September 1st when drug possession becomes a crime again in Oregon, but got pushed back to sometime in October. Until then, Portland Police will call a team at Portland Fire and Rescue to bring withdrawal medicine straight to the streets. And it looks like this.
That's it right there. This has 8 milligrams of active medication in it.
Paul Keltner is one of the nurses tasked with administering the medicine.
If we can connect with those individuals and we can show them, hey, here's an alternative. 10 minutes from now, you're going to be feeling a lot better.
It is the hope of everybody involved that when we're in this deflection setting, we can provide them this opportunity to recognize there is a pathway for success.
Even if that pathway is limited, right now Portland Fire can only offer this medicine 4 days a week.
We would love to see the opportunity for have that funded to be 24/7.
Officials at Multnomah County admit due to their own staffing issues, only those caught with possession during weekdays will get the option of deflection. Outside those hours, police will cite or arrest people.
Okay, that's actually really good to know.
When it comes to providing these medicines that are needed in order to ease the pain that the individuals are going through, we're 100% critical. We are essential.
Blair joins me now outside Portland Fire Station 1. Blair, will fire have a role once the deflection center gets going?
So that's all still being worked out. They don't even really know yet, but what they do know is that they will continue to offer this withdrawal medicine. They've been offering it since January, and they will continue to do so even once that center opens. I also want to point out Portland Fire won't be offering people deflection. That piece falls under law enforcement. They'll simply come when police call to offer that life-saving medication.
All right, I guess that makes sense. And we heard Portland Fire talk about the need for more funding to expand this work. What else do they need?
So, Pat, you can just add them to the list of first responders calling on the county to open a sobering center, a place they can take people under the influence, different from that of a deflection center.
Oh, that's totally critical and helpful. Yeah, I mean, when you are on the street and you're addressing somebody who might be, you know, someone drives by, they see someone laying in a gutter, and it's just somebody who's just had too many drinks. You don't need to have them go to a hospital care for that. You don't need to have them go and address a jail cell. A sobering center, a place where people can safely just come back to normal and then go about their business would be very helpful for the entire community.
Public use became very rare. People used to hide the fact that they're addicts. Now people are just too up on the sidewalk shooting drugs, and there's less needles around because there's so much foil, and it's just really disgusting either way. There used to be so much shame and pride. People used to pride themselves on not looking like an addict in public. And now people are okay with being flailing and being stupid and screaming about drug deals out in the open where children can hear, and it's at parks.
All right, so speaking of the many difficult sides of the drug crisis, as we were talking with that woman you just heard from, a few tents down today, we witnessed a man attacking another woman inside the tent. We'll spare you the details, but we could hear her yelling for help, and he left her with no clothes on and without any money. I went over to go check on her and tried to help her find some clothes and her things, but at that point he came back, so I backed off, and I could see he had a large knife with him. So I called Portland police. They showed up within 10 minutes. I saw them take his knife, and a female officer was talking to the woman in the tent. And afterwards, the officer told me it was a dispute over drug money.
Another rough day out on the streets. All right, thank you, Blair. Appreciate it. Now to that big federal trial in downtown Portland that began this week regarding the massive merger between Fred Meyer's parent company, Kroger, and Safeway's ownership, Albertsons. I want to make sure that we're all up to speed on what's going on here. This is really huge in terms of national implications, and it affects everyone who buys food. So, yes, that does mean you. This trial is all about a request for a temporary injunction, so it's requested by the federal government to put the brakes on this proposed merger. If the judge in Portland grants the injunction, the Federal Trade Commission will then run this merger past an in-house administrative law judge. The companies definitely do not want that. Their lawyers have said that the in-house process almost always kills these big mergers because of how long and cumbersome the process is. The deals simply just fall apart amid the delay, they claim. Now, this deal would be worth $24.6 billion and would be the largest supermarket merger in U.S. history. The main lawyer for the Fed says the two chains compete in 22 different states, which helps keep prices low for consumers. But the companies counter that the government's missing the point that the chains are really competing against giants like Walmart. They say Walmart grocery sales in 2003 were $63 billion, and last year it was more like $247 billion. The Fed say the merger would kill competition, meaning higher grocery prices and less bargaining power for union workers. Oregon federal judge Adrian Nelson will hear from about 40 different witnesses over the next 3 weeks. then decide whether to issue the injunction. It's all happening right here. Day 4 of the trial wrapped up today, and we caught up with Bloomberg reporter Leah Nyland, who has spent all of this week inside the courtroom. She said there was interesting testimony from C&S today. That's the company that's set to buy hundreds of stores in the merger, but is lacking in some experience.
The FTC has made a sort of big deal of the fact that C&S, the company that is buying these stores, has no experience in pharmacy and no experience in fuel. And so all of the executives who testified today confirmed that. C&S has only ever operated one pharmacy and has only operated it for 2 years. And they have never operated a fuel center. So this would be a completely new area of the business for them, which is, again, something that the FTC in the various states argue is not great for consumers because they might come in and not really know what they're doing.
We also asked Leah about her headline from earlier this week that's been making waves online, how inflation took center stage in downtown Portland.
And then there was the head of pricing from Kroger who got on the stand and was talking a little bit about how inflation has affected the pricing. And he did say that they definitely try and pass the inflation on to consumers, like they don't want to sort of pick that up themselves. But there was an email from spring of this year in which he acknowledged to his own bosses that the prices at which they have raised things like milk and eggs have actually been more than inflation. So even though, you know, it has increased the costs that they have to pay as the retailer, they've actually taken a little bit of advantage of that and kept their prices higher than they needed to otherwise. So in some of these examples that we saw, they were talking about, you know, as much as like a 32-cent swing in egg prices in a week. And Kroger was not dropping its prices, those 37 cents, even though they got it cheaper from, you know, from the poultry farmer. They were keeping it higher because, you know, all of the money that they get from that is money that can go towards, you know, their sort of bottom line.
That egg profit makes me mad. I eat a lot of eggs. All right. All sorts of interesting things coming out of this trial. One other thing for you, C&S wholesalers run Piggly Wiggly. Those are stores in Southeast. You may have seen them if you've traveled or if you're from there. Today, they said in court that if the merger goes through and they buy hundreds of stores in our region, Piggly Wiggly will not be coming to the Pacific Northwest. If you haven't heard of them, that really is the name. They would plan to rebrand 49 Safeway and 9 Albertsons stores to QFC and leave the other stores with their original names. Now, if you'd like to read more about this trial, and we really think that you should, check out Bloomberg.com and go find Leah's fantastic reporting. We're planning to check in with her a few more times before the trial wraps up in the middle of next month. Coming up next on The Story, an update on efforts to save the northern spotted owl. A controversial plan by the feds to kill hundreds of thousands of barred owls took a step forward this week. When those killings could begin and why some believe the plan is doomed to fail. When The Story returns. This week, U.S. Fish and Wildlife updated its controversial plan to help struggling northern spotted owls by killing nearly 500,000 other owls in Oregon, Washington, and California. Yeah, it's a real plan. According to the feds, killing 450,000 barred owls over the next 30 years is necessary to keep the spotted owl from going extinct. Barred owls are native to the East Coast, but have been moving into the West in increasing numbers since the 1970s. They're bigger than the spotted owls, and they compete for the same prey and habitat. Spotted owls were already suffering from habitat loss due to logging and were listed under the Endangered Species Act in the 90s. Some advocates, like the Bird Alliance of Oregon, have expressed reluctant support for the plan because spotted owl numbers have dropped rapidly. But not everyone thinks that killing one species of owl to save another is a good idea. The president of Animal Wellness Action says the plan will cause an immense amount of suffering, but more importantly, they think it just won't work.
We're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars. We're going to have an enormous body count of barred owls, and we're not going to do the spotted owls anything fundamental to improve their circumstance because they're still going to face the same habitat problems that put them in this situation in the first place.
Beyond that, he says, in all likelihood, barred owls will just fly in from British Columbia and repopulate.
It has zero chance of working, not 5%, not 10%. It has zero chance. There's no precedent for it. It's too big an area, too many protected habitats, not enough labor to get it done, and repopulation, in-migration, increased survivorship of juveniles, increased clutch sizes. It just can't work.
Well, that sounds promising. The Fish and Wildlife Service has said the plan would be carried out by trained professionals and public hunting would not be allowed. Despite objections, barred owl removals, the nice way of saying killings, could begin as soon as next spring. Coming up on The Story, police departments across the country are starting to use drones to help officers on the ground, and that's also happening here in Portland. But new technology in the state of Washington could help clear the way for even more police drones, potentially serving as first responders in the sky. Details when The Story returns. two drone engineers in the state of Washington believe they hold the key to changing policing as we know it. Pretty big statement. And a recent move by the FAA boosted their hopes. Maddie White from our sister station in Seattle tells us more about current police drone regulations and the technology that could expand their use across the country.
It will be a game changer.
Redmond PD Chief Darryl Lowe
Very exciting.
is taking his police work to new heights.
We've responded to bank robberies. We've responded to people who have fled from our officers.
But right now, under FAA rules, if you want to fly a drone,
It does require a visual observer.
you have to have another person stand outside and watch it while it's in flight, keeping an eye out for planes, balloons, and more. It takes a toll on staffing resources and limits how far the drone can fly. However,
There is technology available that we are working with the FAA to validate or prove the concept.
that technology available lives within the four walls of this office in Kirkland.
On the ground, on a tripod, for example, and then it's looking up at the airspace and it's clearing everything in the airspace from the ground.
Echodyne radar. It works in tandem with a drone as a first responder, also called DFR.
This is the one that would be used for DFR, mounted, on a building somewhere.
They're partnering with Seattle-based Brink, which makes the drones Redmond PD just purchased.
Their particular product is going to be a game changer.
The three are now working to prove the radar's safety to the FAA.
Now with the FAA making more and more approvals, we feel, very good about it.
And that will be the next game-changing innovation that the Redmond Police Department will, bring to this community.
Pretty cool. The FAA authorized drones to fly in Dallas without visual observers already. The waiver to do the same has been submitted in Washington based on the technology you just heard about. We asked Portland Police if they're considering something like this for their drone program. They told us no. We'll see. Hey, that's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. But remember the story, our collective story? Well, that never ends. There's no good stuff tonight, but we do have a special college football preview coming your way next. You'll want to stick around for that. In the meantime, I'll see you right back here tomorrow night at 6:30, and we'll say goodbye with a look out the window. Beautiful Oregon day.